I'm saying, no, that the majority status, the number or the nature of the voting block is irrelevant when it comes to a First Amendment analysis. If it's 90% of the citizens or 50.1% of the city council, those minority majority is irrelevant where the First Amendment is implicated.
So even the majority of a city council
Yes.
would be basically illegal if you had a particular religious.
Right. So if in my Hasidic rabbi hypothetical, if Hasidic Jews became, let's say they came down here with a massive campaign and every member of the Villa Park City Council was a Hasidic Jew, and they all voted unanimously for the giant menorah at Hanukkah, that would not have any bearing. It would be unconstitutional whether it was a mere majority or 100% of the city council. So if, let's say, 100% of the voting population voted for the menorah here in Villa Park, and 100% of the city council also voted for the menorah at Hanukkah, it would still be unconstitutional.
But that's kind of a little bit outside the realm of having a plaque on the wall. Plaque on the wall, of course, would be argued that, well, it's not a giant plaque. It's a 6 by 8 inch plaque.
Well, it doesn't matter. The size doesn't matter. It's still a religious display on public property. And I use the example of the menorah so that people who'll be watching this on video who don't think there's a problem with majority rule in matters of public expression of religion would have second thoughts. And so if the residents and the voting population of the city thought to themselves, if they wanted to say, you know what, it's a good idea for the majority to be able to have their religious expression, what if that majority changes based on demographics?
I wanted to ask John one question. Do you think it is secular or a religious motto?
Well, it's both. And the courts have found that it's both.
And if we could just be clear, I mean, John and I are both.
Gotta come up here. It's not going to get on video.
I just want to be clear for the record, because I know this is being taped, and for the audience here, because John and I are both attorneys. The law currently says that it is constitutional to put up this plaque of "In God We Trust" in this room. Now, you may disagree with the court's finding that, and you might want to challenge that. And indeed, maybe if it passes, there may be people that want to challenge that. But let's be clear and not mislead the people who are here into thinking that it's unconstitutional as the law as it currently states.
There's only one little out on that, and that is the states may give more First Amendment protection than the federal Constitution, but not less. So it has happened that the California Supreme Court has held on some occasions that the religion clauses of the Constitution in the California state Constitution are stronger than the national. So the only possibility would be to argue ultimately the California Supreme Court that regardless of what the federal Establishment Clause has been interpreted to mean, the state Constitution's no preference clause disallows that. That would be a technical argument. But if the state courts went along with the federal, then yes. But you see, what we're discussing here is whether, regardless of what the Supreme Court says, should it be constitutional, and whether or not it's constitutional, is it ultimately a good idea for government to make any religious expression?
If that's the end of the questions, then we will move on to our closing statements. Would you like to go first?
How long do we have for the closing statement?
How long do we have for the closing statements? Let's go for 5 minutes apiece.
Okay.
Fire away.
Before retiring from the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor admonished her colleagues that the separation of church and state has served the United States so well, and its absence has created so many problems in other nations, that she admonishes her colleagues not to abandon the principle of government neutrality in matters of religion. Now, let's look at what would happen if the views of one Supreme Court justice became the law of the land. Clarence Thomas takes the view that the No Establishment Clause does not apply to the states at all, and that each state should be free to have their own official religion or state church if they want to, even though he would deny this to the federal government. Imagine if each state could have its own official religion as per the interpretation of the Constitution by Justice Thomas. How divisive would that be? What kind of civil strife would that lead to? And so we have to ask ourselves, like politicians ask, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Well, constitutional advocates have to ask, are we better off if government has to be strictly neutral in matters of religion, or are we better off if government can play favorites between belief and non-belief? If government cannot betray any preference for God versus no God, then everyone is free and everyone is equal, because no religious person is deprived of their rights just because they can't use the machinery of government to announce their religious views, just like no non-believer is deprived of their rights if they can't use the machinery of government to announce their views. If I cannot stand on the steps of City Hall using the City Council's bullhorn to say there is no God, I'm not less free. But if believers can't use the City Council's bullhorn on the steps of City Hall to say there is a God, they're not any less free either. So if our objective is maximizing liberty for all Americans, regardless of their viewpoint on matters of religion, then the separation of church and state, defined as government neutrality in matters of religion, not being able to favor one religion over others, and not be able to favor belief over non-belief, is the best way to go. And the concept of the separation of church and state, where government must be neutral, will in the end lead to the greatest freedom for both the believer and the non-believer.
I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and mainly thanks to our two speakers.
Thank you.